So Dan Salvato didn't ask me anything on Reddit where you were allowed to ask him questions, and I did. He didn't answer my question, but he did answer a lot of other questions. So I'll be going over them in this video. Um, I won't be reading every single question and answer line by line. It'll be more of a too long didn't read sort of thing where I'll be explaining the main point of it, of a question and an answer, and also my opinion on it. So yeah, let's get started. So this first question is by Sandhead Drelite. I'm sorry if I mispronounce anyone's name, but the question is though that they believe that the side stories are a kind of apology to fans who became attached to the characters and wish to see them live a happy existence. Dan says though that it's actually the other way around. He sees the side stories as a token of appreciation. He says he feels as though the club members have come to life after DDLC was released. So rather than being an apology, these side stories are more of a thank you to everyone who made DDLC what it is. So next question is by Gucci Bepis 2020. Is Monica the imposter? To which Dan says she does a lot of venting in Act 3. This is clearly a joke and a reference to the game Among Us. In case you don't know, there's one person who's the imposter, and the imposter can use the vents in the game. So venting is considered, if you go into the vents, people know you're the imposter. And here venting is used in the other sense. It's a pun basically. In that Monica does a lot of venting in Act 3. Next question is by Siberian Zanadu. The question is whether Dan feels though that the disclaimer at the beginning of DDLC takes away something from the game, and if he wishes though that people could just walk into it as a normal visual novel and not know what's going on. To this, Dan says the disclaimer was always a deliberate design choice. So he basically says that there's a strong theme in DDLC and DDLC Plus where you don't know what you're supposed to be taking seriously, and the disclaimer is part of that. Like in a lot of the trailers, it also says, "Hey, get ready for the number one psychological horror experience. Everything is cute." So this sort of confusion and the idea though that you kind of have to experience the game for yourself is something that he wanted to put in the game, and I can kind of see that. But at the same time, if you didn't know that DDLC is a horror game and without the disclaimer, it would make the surprise more surprising. But at the same time, I kind of get where he's coming from. Next question is by Sheepscape, who asks about what the most difficult complications were in bringing the DDLC experience to consoles. Like, trying to port a game which is on the PC to consoles and the challenges that come with it. Dan basically says, though, that neither the PC version nor the console version are the definitive ways to experience the game. You can experience it anyway, and he was kind of excited to know what he could get away with doing on console. DD Throwaway Club asked an interesting question about whether or not any last names were programmed or designed for any of the girls. Dan says from the beginning he chose not to give any of them last names because it sort of gave the feel, though, that DDLC was made by an amateur who didn't put too much thought into the game, and not giving any of the girls last names sort of makes them seem more one-dimensional, which is supposed to be a part of DDLC, at least in the beginning. Like they're all supposed to look one-dimensional, so no last names were ever, you know, designed or thought up for any of them. The next question is also a joke one, much like the Among Us one. How do your Yoshi story speedruns play into the deeper lore of DDLC? And then Salvato gives some answer regarding cherries. I really don't know what that is or what it's related to, but if you want to make some conspiracy theory on that, you can. Northbound Goat wants to ask if Dan Salvato has any kind of routine when working on games, or whether or not that he does it freeform. And the answer was one of the longer ones. I'm not going to read the whole thing out. But he does mention that he has ADHD, so staying on top of things is a bit of a problem for him. But the way he deals with it mainly is by keeping the scope of the game in mind. He says there are a lot of things which kind of overwhelm you when you're trying to make a game. But if you know how long the game is going to be and how long your story is, then you can keep it as a goal in mind, and that helps you stay focused. Next question is by Silver. It has 3 parts. One, are you planning on making any more visual novels? To which Dan Salvato says, yes, he does have plans for another visual novel he wants to make, but it's probably still years away though. Secondly, if you could give Natsuki a unique death scene, what would it be? Dan says though that Natsuki is always struggling to be respected by, the other club members. So in a way, giving her a death scene which is improper, she doesn't get a death scene like Sayori and Yuri, sort of feels fitting to her character. And the third question is, in retrospect, would you want to change or add anything to Act 2? Dan says so that after DDLC's original release, he wanted to make some updates with touch-ups to Act 2, but then he realized though that if he wanted to put in everything, he would keep changing the game and stuff, and he didn't want to do that, so after one patch, he basically left it alone. Next question is by Mons the Word, and the question is whether or not people within the DDLC fandom have interpreted the game in ways that he, Dan Salvato did not intend for. Dan says, though, that in the game's release originally, there was a bug in Act 3 which would cause the game to sort of, shut down or glitch out after one of the monologues. And he went to fix it, but then someone mailed him saying, though, that, you shouldn't fix it because the way, though, that it sort of froze the game sort of tied into their experience. They felt, though, that, yeah, this is how the game is supposed to be experienced, even though, that's not how it's actually supposed to be. And so it just ties into the fact that people experience things in different ways. And Dan wants to respect the way they, people interpret DDLC, even if it's not, what he wanted. This is another joke question, and I also live in New Jersey, but I don't know what Taylor ham or pork roll is. It seems to have something to do with bagels, and do not ask me about it because I have lived in New Jersey, and I still have no clue. So, Delta Streamer 21 wanted to ask about Your Reality. They really liked the song, and they wanted to know about the thought process that went into designing the song. So Dan says that the first time a game made him feel deep emotions was when he first played Portal. I haven't played Portal, so I don't know about this, but there's an ending song, and that made him feel strongly about it. And he goes on to say, though, that DDLC is really Monika's story, so if you thought Monika was best girl, guess what? All of us are right. Who would have thought that? And so the song is a way to humanize Monika at the end of the game. And from his answer, it appears, though, that the lyrics were thought of later. The way he came up with the song was, though, that he was listening to the DDLC theme, and then he thought of a few lines, and from then he moved on and made Monika's song. So that's rather interesting to know, though, that the DDLC theme was composed first, and then Your Reality later, based off of that. Wingless Chicken Wings asks, can we get an actual Monika route? And Dan says, I think the more appropriate question here is, can Monika get an actual U route? Why you gotta do that to us, Dan? We have another joke here. Who's gonna win in a fight, Natsuki versus Kratos? Dan says, are there any stage hazards? Is Meta Knight banned? I think this is a Smash Bros reference. I haven't played Smash Bros in some time, so I don't know if Kratos is in the game, but if he is, I guess that's where this ties in. Also, Dan made a Super Smash Bros mod earlier on, so, I have a stupid story. Just wanted to say, though, that the game inspired them to make their own game, and they've been working on it for over 2 years, but they finished it, and Dan basically congratulates them. Alice Hiragi Simp just wanted to know, though, that DDLC deals with some heavy subject matter, so they also want to write stories regarding, stuff which is rather delicate, so they just wanted some tips on how to do so. The answer to this is a bit of a long one. You might want to read it yourself. Again, I'll be linking to this in the description. But basically, Dan says while writing characters, you have to be sure, though, of what their identity is. Basically, you don't want them to be one note. Like what people might do is if they write a character on depression, they'll make them depressed first and add in other traits later so that they fit that. And the trick is to remember, though, that your characters are human first. And it can be very powerful when you make a character do something and then, have the reader or player think, hey, I do that too. So, yeah. Fofoku wants to know how the release of DDLC impacted Dan Salvato's life. This is the longest answer I could find, and that's why it's going to be split into two images. He basically says that the release of it and the success of it changed his life in a lot of ways. First, he says, though, that he just wants to remind people, though, that creators are people too. People tend to idolize creators, but they're just humans just like everyone else. Also, he says, though, that its initial popularity forced a huge number of responsibilities on him, which was kind of difficult for him because he didn't expect the game to be so successful. And he was mainly just doing what he liked up till that point, but now it felt like he had to do something like this. He then goes on to say, though, that though he struggled a lot, it was an ideal path forward for him, and he learned lots of stuff about himself and about his ADHD. I don't know if this is mentioned somewhere here, but he mentioned on Twitter, though, that just a few years back he managed to find the right combo of medications to treat his ADHD so he could work on stuff better. And he says, though, that he's not too concerned with popularity. He also has other projects which not a lot of people will see, but he still wants to keep working on. From Yuri with Love wants to ask whether or not Yuri from the side stories also has a self-harm problem, because it's never mentioned explicitly. And Dan says, though, that the side stories kind of wrote themselves, and so he basically just put the characters in a situation and let what he thought would happen happen. And so the reason why it's never mentioned, I guess, is because he wanted to make the struggles more realistic, and I guess he felt it wouldn't have come up in the side stories. Yeah, Nitsuki wants to ask if he has any advice for people who also suffer from ADHD. So Dan links to a YouTube channel on, which has tips of how to deal with ADHD, which he felt helped him. He also describes his own experience with ADHD, and though that feels like his mind sort of goes on autopilot, picking the most stimulating thing for him to do, and he sort of had to train himself to get away from that. And he also mentioned something called the bullet journal method, and it's helped him a lot. I don't know a lot about that. Zoom106YT wanted to ask two things. First, what made Dan decide to release DDLC Plus? And secondly, which side story is Dan's favorite? Dan says, though, that he wanted to port DDLC to consoles because there were people who don't have access to PC or play PC games. And he was also excited to see what he could get away with by porting the game to a console. He also basically says he doesn't have a favorite side story. Nian Thurman wanted to ask were the characters inspired by actual people. Dan says yes, and not in the sense that one person inspires one character, but the traits he put into the characters were traits he had seen with people in real life. Dorney Dom, I have no idea if I pronounced that right, says that he thinks a lot of people think of DDLC as a good first VN for newcomers, and he just wants to know Dan's thoughts on that. Dan says that he did design DDLC in a way to be an introduction to visual novels because the target audience was people who had never played one before, and he basically just wanted to show people the power that interactive fiction has. Don109 wanted to ask how did you originally feel about DDLC when it was about to release? And the same with DDLC Plus. Dan says, it was a very anxious time period where he was just hoping people to experience it in the same way though that he experienced it. And he says releases are a lot more fun a month after than they are on release day because release day is just really stressful. Hoping that nothing goes wrong and stuff. Make Way for Princess Ollie wants to ask what on earth possessed Dan to make the game. He or she wants to recreate the conditions to get a good idea. Dan says he experienced a lot of great media which inspired him to take his emotions and try to deliver them to other people. He says not to worry about if you don't get a great idea the first time or quote unquote great idea the first time. You should rather focus on trying to deliver your experiences and emotions to people to make a good story first. It's Noah wanted to ask him what his favorite visual novels were, and he said they were Tsukihime, Steins Gate, and 999. And I haven't played a single one of those, so I really can't comment on that. Earphone Pretzel wanted to ask, as an intern who's getting into game design, how one should approach a big project, and Dan links to his old AMA from the release of DDLC, where he talks more about this. Arctic Life wanted to ask favorite manga slash anime protagonist, and Dan says there are too many genres for him to pick a single one, but he'll give a mention to Orne Kumiko from Hibike Euphonium. And I have no idea what that is, but this is an image I found on the internet of it, so if you know what this is, or who she is, or why it's so important, do please tell me in the comments. Doodle Mancy wanted to ask how Dan dealt with the is this scary part of the creative process of making a horror game. They're also writing some horror stuff, and he feels like there's no real good way to know, whether or not what you're writing is scary or not. Dan says that was a big concern for him too, and it was only when other people also played the game though that he sort of got confidence in it. So he advises, just doing whatever you think is right, and then based on feedback, changing it. Potato Coke wanted to ask whether or not DDLC is supposed to be pro waifuism or anti, or what its stance is, because it seems to be kind of both, sort of. And Dan just says, though, that the purpose is just to look inside and talk about waifuism a bit more. It's not supposed to be pro or against. So there's no definitive statement, it's just more of introspection. Here is another question which I have no idea about. I don't know what Melty Blood is, or what Type Lumina is, or what FGC is. So if anyone can explain it in the comments, just, tell me. And that is actually it for this. I don't think he's answered any more questions, and I don't think he's answering any more now. I think the AMA is over. But if there's a question that he answered and it isn't on here, I might do a follow-up video. Do tell me in the comments if something like that happened. Thanks for watching. Do leave a comment, do leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe.